Last week, Olivia talked a little bit about listening, and today I'm coincidentally going to be talking about it a little bit more and how it can help our relationship with God. But I figured that to speak honestly about our relationship with God, we first need to speak honestly about our regular relationships in general. Because it's really easy to talk about the long periods of easygoing because that's what everyone wants to talk about and it's what everyone wants to hear. We want to talk about the hand-holding and all that other great stuff. However, we also need to talk about the dreaded, inevitable rough patches that we sometimes face. And these are tough to talk about because, well, they're absolutely crucial to any relationship. Without them, there's no real trust. The first period of easygoing, if anything, can be the most uncomfortable because you're constantly wondering, how long will this last? What will the first slip up be? How will we handle it? And will we even be able to handle it? This feeling can be unnerving to the point where the first problem is almost a sigh of relief. Finally, we don't have to ignore the 300-pound gorilla that's been in the room this whole time. But the sigh of relief is usually very brief because then you realize that you have to do something. We can turn to friends and family for advice. We can look at self-help books, relationships for dummies, but what we really need in the end is a conversation with the person in question. At the end of the day, all we really want to do is just talk with that person in a straightforward manner about everything. Our worries, our feelings, our insecurities, and our wishes. I think we can all tell where this is going. This is a hopefully clever but probably cliche metaphor for our relationship with God. At some point in our faith, we start to wonder if our faith is even still there. Perhaps our faith has been tested through moments of cruelty and confusion. Maybe we have been exposed to a convincing theological or philosophical argument. Maybe through our increasing knowledge and independence, we have been led to believe we no longer need some higher power. Whatever the reason may be, the disconnect is our fault. God is not to blame. Perhaps we sensed a poor connection and thought it was on his end. Perhaps we thought he had thrown his hands in the air and had given up on us, or maybe he just lost interest. It sounds very dramatic and angsty, I know, but I'm convinced these feelings I'm describing are very, very real. Just like our earthly relationships, however, this rough patch will make the mutual love stronger. With this being said, we don't want to wallow in our pity and our uncertainty forever. From the moment we're in it, no matter what we may tell ourselves, we are ready to get out. The pity party, the woe is me cry can only last so long before we run out of breath. When we trip like this, we need a very strong hand to lift us up. Sometimes, for me, perhaps the Bible just isn't enough to do that. At my lowest point, I need more to reassure me of God's everlasting love and presence. I can read the Word, which is terrific for better understanding, but when I close the cover and set down the Holy Book, I struggle to remember the message. Whatever I felt or learned when reading, I tend to forget once I step back outside. So instead, I need God to speak to me through himself directly. I want him to remind me of his presence in my life, not just in the Bible. But let's step back for a moment. It's not as if God leaves us be and then chooses to chime in only when we are struggling. He is constantly talking to us, and all we need to do is listen. Even more so, God is always listening. One of my favorite books from the Bible is Psalms. Chapter 116, verses 1 through 2 says, I love the Lord, for he heard my voice. He heard my cry for mercy, because he turned his ear to me. I will call on him as long as I live. And another one, chapter 18, verse 6 reads, In my distress I called to the Lord. I cried to my God for help. From his temple he heard my voice. My cry came before him into his ears. Let me tell you something. Listening is not as easy as these verses make it sound. For us, it can be very difficult, but only because we make it that difficult for us. Some of you may remember last winter when we tried the star gifts here at church. They're just cut-out paper stars with a word written on each of them, like patience or love or forgiveness. And the basic idea is that God gave the gift of the star to the wise men so they could find the Son of God, and in return, the wise men gave their gifts to Jesus. So likewise, whichever word we were handed at church is a gift to us, and we should in turn make it a gift to the rest of the world. I looked over at my mom and saw that she got the word vision, and all I could think was how lucky I am because I just got the word listening. To me, vision seemed like such a difficult word, and it still does. That's a tough one to incorporate into your life. But I thought listening would be the easiest one to follow through on, because all you do is sit there while someone talks. That's what I thought at first, because to an extent, that's what I do at school every day. That's what I do in college. But then the more I thought about it, I realized that's not exactly the case. Actually, that's not anywhere close to the truth. Yes, obviously you should listen in school or in your job, but listening is very different from passively sitting. It's like the Simon and Garfunkel song, people talking without speaking, people hearing without listening. There's a key difference there. Hearing is when you sit there at your desk and you know the teacher is saying something. Then on the test, you just blank. The teacher definitely said something, but we clearly weren't listening. Instead, listening is when we actively hear the words and we understand them and we take them to heart. Listening is when we go to take the test and we don't just mindlessly recall the answer, but we really know it and understand it. Teachers far prefer listening to hearing. Now this is all well and good, but another difficulty that arises is knowing when to listen or knowing what to listen to. There's a very frustrating argument that I sometimes hear when people talk about religion. Someone will mention the idea of signs or messages from God, to which someone else will reply, yes, but how do you know when God is actually trying to speak to you? How can you tell the difference between divine providence and something that just happens? And that's the argument I often hear. Well, if we're talking about signs from God, then in my opinion, we're talking about miracles. God speaking directly to us. To me, miracles aren't just the grandiose. They aren't just the extreme instances in which a person survives some terrible crash or a fatal disease, although those definitely are miracles. Miracles, big or small, are any way that God manipulates the ordinary. There's no guesswork here either, as far as I'm concerned. We just know when He's speaking directly to us. And I don't think that's a very lazy answer. I think it's very true. When we see something in the world that speaks to us, we get a certain kind of feeling, as if someone planted it there just for us. Whenever I think of this, I think of my Aunt Kathy. When my Uncle Steve passed away, she was obviously very sad, and the beach was their favorite spot. So every year she would go to the beach, and she still does. And one time she wrote in the sand, "I love you, Steve," with a big heart drawn around it. This was one of her ways of speaking to him. And then on the car ride back home, this dusty car passed her on the interstate, and the words, "I love you, Kathy," were written on the back with a big heart drawn around it. I am so convinced, as is the rest of the family, that God was speaking directly to my Aunt Kathy at that moment, and that was a miracle. I also personally see a lot of miracles in nature. Everybody sees miracles in the most unlikely of places, but when they see them, there is no guesswork involved. One of the real struggles is eliminating the guesswork that we create for ourselves. This can be especially challenging when we consider another way God speaks to us, which is indirectly, through other people. I'm a strong believer of God speaking through people. I don't just mean He speaks through pastors and world leaders. I think He speaks through everyone in a unique way. Everyday conversation is saturated with God's messages. Through friends and family, for example, He reassures us, comforts us, makes us laugh, and showers us in love. He gives us a home. One of my favorite quotes, and I hate to say it, is from the movie Evan Almighty, which is the movie where Morgan Freeman plays the role of God. At one point in the film, Freeman walks up to a woman praying and he asks her, "If someone prays for patience, do you think God gives them patience, or does He give them the opportunity to be patient? If he prayed for courage, does God give him courage, or does He give him opportunities to be courageous? If someone prayed for the family to be closer, do you think God zaps them with warm, fuzzy feelings, or does He give them opportunities to love each other?" Listening, listening, listening. That is the key here. Through our everyday conversations and actions, God is not only giving to us, but He is simultaneously giving us opportunities to give back. The love poured upon us by a family member is an opportunity or a signal to love back. The heartbreak of a friend is an opportunity to be more sympathetic. And yes, this also means that our more disagreeable neighbors are messages and opportunities as well. The man down the road who shouts his political beliefs from the rooftops, he is an opportunity for patience and tolerance. He perhaps is a message from God that we should be more patient and tolerant. It's far too easy to only take our agreeable companions as messages from God. It's very, very difficult to find the purpose in harmful or ignorant slander and action. But don't worry, God only tells us what we need to hear. That feeling I mentioned that comes along with miracles, that feeling of immediate relevance to our lives, that feeling is also very much present in these indirect messages from God. I like to think of it as something I once heard Philip Seymour Hoffman say in an interview. For those of you who don't know, he was a famous, talented film and stage actor. I remember he was discussing his first experiences in the theater as a child. He would go with his mother, and he kept on referring to this special moment when you're watching the play and you look around like, is anyone else getting this? No one in the room gets this but me. Something that is said or done on stage strikes so deeply within you, or so greatly relates to you, that you're almost certain no one else understands. You get this overwhelming feeling that the play was written and performed only for you. Now, of course, this isn't the case, but that doesn't make the feeling any less significant. And this isn't only the case in the theater. We can feel this when we are sitting in church, reading a book, or simply talking with a friend. Now, this feeling of relevancy can cause us to celebrate, but it can also cause us to squirm in our seat. Again, the messages are not always enjoyable to hear, but they are always true, and they are always necessary. Either way, something is said or it's done, and there is no doubt that God is there. It's beautiful, and it's the exact kind of connection we need when we feel distance from God. This practice of listening should be seen as a triumph in itself. As I said before, it's more difficult to listen than we could ever imagine. Most of the time, this difficulty arises from the fact that we are covering our ears and shutting God out. We know there is room for improvement within ourselves, and we're scared to be given an opportunity to do so. After all, once we're given an opportunity, we no longer have an excuse to lay dormant. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but there's still another challenge we encounter after we go through the gauntlet of listening. In our endeavor to regain our feeling of God's presence, we must also act, and that's quite possibly harder than it is to listen. Through listening, for example, we can hear God's message to us. We can see the opportunity He's given us. We recognize and acknowledge what He's laid before us, but we may then act as if we never saw it. It's a real shame to do this. By saying this, I mean it's a shame to learn a lesson and to not apply it to our lives. Unfortunately, life isn't always like the books and the movies. In those, the protagonist usually learns some key lesson that he or she holds dear for the rest of their life, using it in the most difficult of situations. Sometimes in real life, however, we completely abandon our past experience. We abandon an obvious calling altogether for some unknown reason, probably a fear of commitment or responsibility. Poor Peter from the Bible, I believe, experienced this moral dilemma through his 3 denials of Christ that was just read. I can't help but feel that Peter realized what he was doing before the rooster crowed twice. I feel that if Jesus were to confront one of us personally and say, "You will deny me 3 times," which is essentially a challenge, we would thoroughly remember him saying that to us. Therefore, I'm inclined to believe that at every moment he was confronted about his relationship with Christ, Peter distinctly remembered what Jesus had said to him. Despite remembering it, he still denied Christ every time. I imagine he didn't weep in the end because he suddenly realized what he had done, but instead because he was mortified and wished he would have acted like he should have. He learned a clear lesson to be proud as a follower of Christ. Then he actively chose to abandon his duty. This isn't an uncommon occurrence as far as I know. I admit that I've often fallen into that trap of disowning my own responsibilities. Even when I recognize this is what I'm doing, I still find it difficult to act accordingly. So, my call to action for today, or my multiple calls to action, are the following. First, actively listen. Listen to God and listen to others, because in my eyes, those 2 types of listening are one and the same. Listen to God when he's his own mouthpiece, speaking directly to you through big and small miracles. Then listen to him as he speaks through others, giving you opportunities to give and take. Secondly, once you listen, be sure to act accordingly. Put your lessons into practice and apply God's words to your own life. Do not be fearful of your responsibility as a follower of Christ and a child of God. Instead, simultaneously embrace and bestow all gifts. In doing so, you will surely be reminded of God's overwhelming presence in your lives, and you will surely regain your foothold in your faith. Amen.